Good morning, and welcome back to what's essentially going to be the last build video for our Highwater Pass series. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit surprised we got here at all. You know, when I first started building the zoo, I was doing it as an experiment, you know, just to see if I had the patience to actually record anything, you know, put anything down at all. And, you know, once I started, it just sort of came out, you know, and it's been quite a journey for us to learn how to, you know, record videos, edit them, do audio editing. You know, we've learned a lot in these past few months. So it's been a wild experience, and I mean, really, I know it sounds kind of corny, but thank you for being here for any of it, and you know, some of you all of it. It's really cool, you know. If it sounds like my audio quality changes throughout this video, that's absolutely happening, you know. This last video, it's taken me a really long time to get all the audio editing and recording done. It's been a little hectic here, you know. I intended for this video to come out like in the first week of July. You know, that didn't happen. So anyway, you know, I think we've spent enough time talking about channel stuff. Let's go ahead and talk about what's on screen right now, which is the two wolf enclosures that we built a little while ago. So these are for the timber wolf and the Arctic wolf, the two species of wolf that we actually have in the game. But I want to take, you know, the rather significant time that we have and just talk about wolves, just sort of in general. It's really hard to parse fact from fiction where they're concerned. Like, really hard. I mean, obviously we have the literal myths and legends. You know, we have Skull and Hati from the Norse. We have, you know, wolf from, you know, many Native American traditions. You know, everybody from the Tsimshian to the Russians has something to say about these animals. And I think that that's really cool, you know. It's like dragon myths. Everybody who's encountered wolves has a story to tell about them. You know, and then of course with the widespreadness of dogs, there's this question of how we came to domesticate them, how we came to befriend them. You know, they're rather large, powerful creatures that travel in massive packs. You know, it's incredible to even look at, you know, where our ancestors were at the time of domestication and to see that they even achieved this at all. You know, never mind how, which itself is full of myth and confusion and mixed data and research, and, you know, the fact that we have wolves that are crossbred back with dogs. We have different dog lineages that may or may not have come out of different locations and places. It's very hard to track. You know, our best guess right now is that they came out of Siberia some 24,000 years ago, which is incredible, you know. They've been with us for as long as we've been human and before. So it's only natural that, you know, we would want to talk about them and think about them and discuss them. But it's resulted in myths that, as fun as they are to talk about around the campfire, they're also in many ways detrimental to the species. You know, obviously there's this idea that the wolf is almost the perfect movie villain. You know, they're smart, they're cunning, they travel in packs. And it makes for dramatic storytelling. You know, a lone hunter being chased down by wolves is the plot of several movies and several books. But is it true? You know, it's hard to parse, you know, what is story and what's fiction. You know, so let's talk about some of those myths. You know, first things first, we got to talk about, you know, the nature of those packs. At this point, I think a lot of people have heard this, but for those who haven't, you know, the research that was originally done, I want to say it was by David Mack, you know, in his book, The Wolf, The Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species. This book, when it came out, it was absolutely groundbreaking because it was the first time that anybody had done genuine ecological research into these animals and treated them, you know, not like monsters and demons and religious icons, but as just animals, you know. Unfortunately, as time progressed, the majority of that book would be disproven. And David Mack himself has attempted to have that book pulled. But, you know, from it, we get a lot of these misconceptions about what a wolf pack is. You know, the idea that there's this alpha male and female who lead the pack, and the betas are subservient, and the omegas are only there for, I don't know, entertainment. Of course, we now know that it's complete bunk. You know, it was bunk about wolves, it's bunk about humans for Anybody who happens to know anybody in that alpha male dude bro culture, none of it's real. And what we know now is that what's actually going on is that these are family units. They're large family units, of course, but I mean, dogs have, 6 to 10 puppies. So of course wolves are going to have, significant number of litters. It's usually 3 or 4 pups in a litter. And what we're looking at is a breeding pair who are raising subsequent generations. And then those generations may stay with their family pack and decide not to move out. They may pick up loners, and then have them join their pack, and then that actually increases the number of breeding pairs in the pack. You don't have to have just one, you can have 2 or 3. And sometimes you have the younger generations leave and go off to form their own packs. So it's sort of this wide distribution, and we see this as being fairly common across all canids. It's not just wolves that do this. Even my namesake, the jackal, is the same way. The younger children, or the older generation of children raise the younger generation of children, and this helps ensure that the pups that they eventually go on to have are going to, be able to grow up happy and healthy. It's essentially a training course. It's really fantastic stuff. So, and then of course, there's the idea of the lone wolf. I brought up the fact that, they may go off and join different packs. Well, a lone wolf, we have this idea that they're this strong, masculine loner who doesn't need anybody, who's separated from the pack and is thriving on his own. But it's complete nonsense. When a wolf becomes separated from its pack, it's a deeply stressful and potentially traumatizing ordeal that they go through. They're so bonded to a pack that, they're literally losing their family and having to find a new one. And many don't survive this period of isolation simply because they can't hunt for themselves without a pack to back them up. Together they can take down elk and even moose, but alone, a singular wolf can maybe take down a rabbit. And even then we have to remember, for as much glamour as we associate with, pack hunting tactics and, the way that they're able to scout and charge and all of this kind of stuff to bring down something as big as a moose, really at the end of the day, they have at most a 15% success rate. They are dangerous, but they're not the, night crawling hunter, seeker, destroyer missiles of doom that I think, we've kind of made them out to be. They're just animals, and I think that they're really cool, so not too much focus on facts and things like that, but quite frankly, wolves are so ubiquitous that you probably know quite a lot just through cultural osmosis. So I don't want to focus on that so much as just dispelling some of the things that we've made up about them, So anyway, with those enclosures done, I think now's a good time to move on. So the next animal that I want to talk about is actually just across the way over here, which is the reindeer, or the caribou. So if you're curious, reindeer and caribou are actually interchangeable terms. One is common in Europe and the other one is common in here in North America. The reindeer itself, as far as I understand it, actually originates from Europe, and the population that we have in Alaska and a little bit of Canada was actually imported for mostly farming and hunting purposes much later on. As far as I understand it, there is not actually a native species of reindeer on this side of the planet. However, I don't actually want to focus on their population. I'd rather talk about what's basically been kind of a love and obsession of mine as far as these animals are concerned. The Svalbard population of reindeer. So for a little bit of context, Svalbard is a tiny, frosted, rocky island off the coast of Norway. It does not have a permanent population, but there is a town. I can't call it a major town. They don't have a hospital, they don't have infrastructure, but people do live there. And because of the fact that there is not really an ability to build it up, there's no real infrastructure, children and old people are actually not allowed to live on the island. There's a cutoff age. It's also one of the only places where you need a gun to live, because the entire island is also covered in polar bears. However, this sort of leaves the Svalbard reindeer in sort of a weird position. Their island is tiny. The only thing it's really covered in is like shrubs, hardy grasses, moss. So this means that their food source is limited, and it limits even further during the winter season. And on top of that, they're surrounded on all sides by polar bears. So this has resulted in something called island dwarfism. There's an inverse of this called island gigantism, which is where an animal trapped on an island with no natural predators will naturally grow larger and lose many of its defensive adaptations. In this case of the Svalbard reindeer, we're actually seeing the inverse, island dwarfism, in which the reindeer are actually quite literally half the size of an average reindeer. I looked up the numbers, I won't bore you, but quite literally half the size. And they have a different coat pattern. They're much more full white, a little bit of light brown, not too much coloration to them. And this helps them blend in on, the ice and the tundra and the rock. Whereas, the average caribou has something called counter shading, which is where they have that dark, rich brown back and the white underbelly. So by being smaller and lighter and harder to see, it allows them to live on this island that is otherwise completely inhospitable. However, that's not the only adaptation not only the Svalbard reindeer have this, but just all reindeer. Their antlers are also different. In most deer and elk species, what we see is that the horns grow only in the males and only from spring until fall, early winter, at which point they drop their antlers and then regrow them the next year. This whole process is both terrifying and fascinating. They actually pull from their bones in order to make antlers. They pull nutrition out of their bones. And then they grow slowly over the course of the antler growing season. During this time, they're called in velvet, and they have a very rich blood supply. They're covered in this thin, velvety membrane, and then when the antlers are ready to harden, that will actually slough off, leaving the antlers like this bright red, very haunting looking. They look like something out of a horror movie for a little bit. And then, of course, all that clears away, and they have this full set of antlers that they then drop in the winter. Well, what sets caribou apart is that the females actually also grow antlers, but for different reasons. The males grow them in order to participate in what's called interspecies combat, where, the males are fighting for territory, for females, to establish dominance in a pecking order, all these things. The females actually grow antlers in order to protect their children and themselves from other females who are also competing for food resources during the winter. So they will grow their antlers in late summer, and then they will keep them all the way through the winter and then drop them in spring when food becomes more plentiful. So it's very interesting. However, you can probably tell I could talk about caribou all day, but we do actually need to move on to our next ungulate, which is the Dall sheep.
Currently our only sheep in Planet Zoo, the Dall sheep can be found exclusively in Alaska and northwestern Canada. They are similar to the more famous bighorn sheep, but are adapted specifically to the cold, featuring a pure white coat. Their isolation rarely brings them into contact with humans, which saves them from many of the problems other animals here at the zoo have had in terms of conservation effort, and their population is considered healthy. However, much like caribou, their horns are one of the most interesting and integral characteristics. Both males and females develop horns, distinct from antlers in that they're made of a sheet of keratin, the same stuff as your fingernails, which grows over bone that forms the actual horn. These are not shed, but are retained and grow throughout the sheep's life, and the sheep uses the size of each other's horns to determine things like age and dominance in a pecking order. Male and female herds only interact during breeding season, or when meeting at salt licks, and during the latter, young males will generally leave the herd that they were born with and join the local ram herd. Males do not compete for females by bucking heads, as is common with other horned ungulates, but instead fight when trying to establish dominance between two rams of a similar horn size. Their horns develop much like the rings on a tree, which helps researchers to determine their age, and generally speaking, they live to be about 12 years old in the wild. However, I think that just about covers everything we need to say about them, so let's move on to one of their neighbors, the Arctic fox.
So next we're going to move over to this, frankly, uncomfortably small piece of land. I wanted to fit the Arctic fox in here somehow, and this was kind of the only place I could fit it. So I know that this isn't a good habitat for it to be in, but it's what we have. But let's talk about Arctic foxes and really sort of how they fit into the Arctic ecosystem. And this is kind of what sets them apart from other foxes, not just, in the genetics. So Arctic foxes, the main thing that people know about them is that they color change. They're black in the spring and summer months, and then they change to white sort of during the fall and the winter months, and this helps them blend in with their ecosystem. But what's more interesting, I think, is how they fit into the general shape of the Arctic ecosystem and what that really looks like. When you live in somewhere that's ice and barren and, you're constantly competing for food sources, the vast majority of the animals that we find up there are predators because there just isn't a lot of foliage. So this means that The herbivore backbone of this frozen tundra is mostly going to be things like voles, lemmings, which, by the way, do not jump off cliffs. That's a Disney invention. Disney is not your friend. But they form the herbivorous backbone, and they burrow through the snow and the ice. And the foxes use that sense of magnetism in their hearing in order to be able to jump down through the snow and to catch their prey. But they're not the only ones who are hunting like this. You know, they're in direct competition with owls, ermines. Ermines are actually more deadly to lemmings than even the foxes are. And all of these different small predator animals form this sort of neighborhood almost, where they're not directly competing with each other. They're not out there directly fighting. Usually. You will get some extra species competition. But for the most part, what's happening is that their actions are affecting everybody else, even when there's no other animals in the area. It forms this very tight-knit ecosystem that I find very interesting. So at this point, we should probably move on to the lynxes real quick. So I actually ended up using the Eurasian lynx in here, but this is actually a stand-in for the bobcat, which is actually native to North America. The Eurasian lynx is not. There are 4 distinct species of lynx. There's the Eurasian one, and then of course there's the Canadian lynx, there's the bobcat, and there's a 4th one. I don't remember his name right now. But they all have, you know, these very specific traits in common, and actually if you look at them in pictures, they look almost indistinguishable. So what really sets them apart is, you know, where they live and how they're living. Bobcats in particular are very well adapted to live in just about any environment. You know, they live from as far north as Canada to as far south as Mexico. So they adapt to, you know, not just snowy environments like the Canadian lynx where, you know, they've got these big old snowshoe paws that help them, you know, live in the snow. Bobcats are much more thin and wiry, and, you know, they're better adapted to living in different places. But even across the range that we see, they've got these micro adaptations. The ones in the north are, you know, obviously bigger and they're fluffier. And then when you get, you know, down into Mexico and the desert areas, they're thin, they're wiry, they don't have a lot of fur. So even within the species, we see a lot of variation. But of course, you know, the thing that sets lynxes apart from all other medium to small cats and cats in general is that bobtail. You might be wondering, like, why do they have that? And researchers are also asking that question. We don't actually know. There's been some theories that it has something to do with heat regulation. That's not been verified. It also doesn't add up with the fact that, like, snow leopards have those big fluffy tails, so, like, why do they... It doesn't make any sense. So that's not, you know, supported in any way. There's also been debate about, you know, whether or not they need it for maneuverability, and, you know, if they lost it because they just don't need the maneuverability that comes with a long tail. But really, what it looks like is that some common ancestor to all lynxes had a mutation that caused their tail to just not develop into a big long fluffy tail, and it didn't affect them in any way and spread into the entire population of lynxes. Which leads me to all kinds of questions. You know, they've got the distinctive ear tufts, all of them have that. They've all got the bobtail. Makes me wonder, like, what was going on with the early lynxes? Like, were they in some sort of genetic bottleneck? I don't know. And unfortunately, you know, we're sort of out of time for this northern area, so we're actually going to hop over to our Asian part of the zoo now. And go talk about some of the animals over there. So the first animal that we have that's part of our zoo's exchange program that you're going to find walking up this big trail is the wild water buffalo. So while my editor and I were watching back this footage, like, the only thing we could think of was the Zebu song from VeggieTales. I did some research. Zebus are actually real. I will leave a link in the description if you want to know more. If that was part of your childhood and you're like, I don't know if that was a real animal. It is. However, the wild water buffalo is not a zebu. But they've also been part of the cultural backbone of Southeast Asia for, like, centuries. You know, their incredible strength has allowed them to haul plows through fields, you know, carry grains to market, all this kind of stuff. But the wild water buffalo, as the name implies, this is the version of the group that has not been tamed down. So they're large, they have fairly few natural predators. You know, they get preyed on by tigers, crocodiles, maybe a black bear too, but not a whole lot messes with them. And they mostly live near, like, riverbeds, swamps, floodplains, that kind of thing. Most of the wild population is is relegated to India, but there are some populations in like Nepal, Bhutan, Thailand, Cambodia. But, unfortunately, because they're large bovids, there's not really a lot of interesting to say about them. Obviously they're gonna live in large herds. They're awake just about all hours of the day. They have constant grazing. It's facilitated by the four-stomach thing. And of course, both the males and the females have massive horns, which are able to ward off, competition, predators, things like that. There's really nothing earth-shattering to talk about here, so we're actually gonna move now onto the great apes up the hill. This habitat.
Okay, so remember how I built this brachiation set way back in, episode 18 or 19 or something? Well, I built it with the expectation that orangutans would eventually get brachiation, but they never did. I have no clue why. They're natural brachiators, so it must be something with the model or the time schedule or something. Anyway, I tore down that entire set and rebuilt a normal jungle gym in its place, and I'm not happy about it, but we do what we have to do. So since we don't have enough time to cover both these animals in specific, let's talk about what they have in common instead. Like I said, they're natural brachiators. This means that they use their arms to swing from branch to branch, rather than using their whole body to climb and jump. This results in some interesting body adaptations. In order to swing like that, their arms need to be disproportionately long compared to their body, so they don't bonk their heads while swinging. Since arms are the primary form of locomotion, it means their legs generally develop a little less. Siamangs still do a pretty decent amount of running and walking and all that, so their legs are still fairly proportional and developed, but orangutans don't really do anything like that. So instead their legs are short and stubby, which makes them easier to curl against the body. Both also have throat sacs for vocalization, but the Siamangs are far more noticeable. They also both primarily make their homes in trees and are generally diurnal. However, there are some major differences between the two species besides appearance. Siamangs are a kind of gibbon. They're gregarious and form close social groups consisting mostly of a dominant male and female, and of course any offspring. Disputes between Siamang groups do happen, but they're very rare. Like most apes, most of their social behaviors revolve around grooming, and they begin every day by singing, as should we all. Orangutans, on the other hand, are mostly solitary and do not form social groups, with bonds generally only existing between a mother and her children. And genetically speaking, they're their own thing entirely. Distantly related to gibbons, kind of, but branched off from gorillas, chimpanzees, and us some 18 million years ago or so. And then there's the face situation. Most apes don't have such extreme dimorphism between the males and females as do orangutans. Obviously there's size, males are larger than females, but most people recognize the male orangutans from their giant cheek pads. These are apparently called flanges, or phalanges. I'm gonna go with flangs. And not only do females not have them, but the males don't necessarily have them either. A male might spontaneously develop them at any point in his life, or never, and we have no clue why, or how, or even what purpose they serve, if any. The last animal we end up building for in the zoo is going to be the sun bear. But, like the grizzly bear, I'm not actually going to be talking about him here. And once again, this is because we're going to have an entire episode dedicated to him in the near future when we start up Big Bear Bend, which is going to be our next big series on the channel. So instead, I'm going to let that footage play out and just take a moment. It's hard to believe that the zoo is done. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I started this project back in November of 2022, and now we're fixing to head into July of 2023. It's been a wild ride, and frankly a massive learning experience for me, my editor, and everyone over here. I cannot thank you enough for actually managing to get this far and listen to me drone on about my weird little hobby. The channel is still extremely small, but it exists, which is more than I can say for this time last year. And of course, I don't really expect this thing to get big either. Planet Zoo's kind of a weird game. It's complicated, it's time-consuming. It's part management game and part build engine. It's just odd. But it's fun, too. And working on this channel has also been a lot of fun. I will be doing other things on here that don't have anything to do with Planet Zoo, but it is going to remain a staple for as long as I have energy for it. And basically what I'm saying is, I'm glad you're here, and I'm going to do my best to make sure there's always something new and interesting to watch. As for technical stuff, I'm trying to find something that works and sounds good. I switched out my monitor again, so hopefully we won't be plagued with this awful aspect ratio for much longer, and also I got a new microphone, but an audio engineer I am not, so someday the videos might actually sound good, just not today. Plus, I'm pretty sure it's because my microphone is about a foot away from my desktop, which whirs like a 747 when I do anything more power-intensive than solitaire. But, you know, we'll find fixes. Anyway, last thing before I go, we will be doing a full tour of the zoo sometime in the near future. Personally, I find zoo tours to be unbelievably boring, so instead we're going to be doing something different and making it a choose-your-own-adventure. We'll see how it works. Maybe it'll be great, maybe it'll be a trash fire, but at least it'll be different. Plus, I have my editor along with me, so hopefully it'll be even marginally more interesting than the alternative. Okay, this is going on too long. Happy Friday, y'all, and I'll see you guys next time in Big Bear Bend.